Whether you're a professional athlete or a seasoned corporate executive, it is easy to enjoy a lifestyle where a paycheck is calling all the shots. But is that sustainable forever? Welcome to Tell Your Boss I Quit with Pete Goodekunst, founder of Good Financial Services and financial planner with Raymond James. Pete helps you financially bridge from the journey you've started through the life goals you've imagined. Sooner or later, by force or by choice, life takes turns. Listen as Pete discusses how to take charge and make your move on your terms with confidence.
John Lennon wrote, "Life is what happens when you're making plans." Well, sounds like he did not take a financial planning course or read many economic media posts which are full of specific actions or so-called rules of thumb that people are told they should follow in their fiscal lives. Well, here to help you navigate the difference between textbook advice and real-life behavior is Goot Financial Services founder and Tell Your Boss I Quit author, Peter Goodekunst.
Well, thanks, Patrice, and welcome. And, you know, it is funny how our art informs real life better than actions. And John Lennon, I think, actually had it right, a lot better than most textbooks, to tell you the truth. And, life does have a funny way of getting in the way of plans. And all too often people can be told what they should be doing. And it's kind of hard to follow that advice. And it's kind of like dieting or, drinking too much. People still do it, even though they shouldn't. So, that's really, I think, what a good financial plan and a good financial planner does is help stay on the course. And so I swear this is the last time I'm going to introduce you this way, Brian, but I'd like to introduce Brian Henrysen, a Good Financial Services associate of mine and the most recently minted CFP in the office as well. So I swear this is the last time I'm going to say this, but as the newer, younger guy in the office, more recently from Temple University, and your studies as CFP. And now having worked together, I was looking at the calendar, we've been working together with clients going on about 4 years. So I'm curious, what is different between what you expected from your academic financial planning studies to what we've been doing working with real life situations?
Yeah, and I may be the most recently graduated person in the office, but it certainly doesn't seem recent for me. It kind of seems like a lifetime ago, if I'm honest. But there's a lot of things that I think have been different, just, dealing and working with clients on a daily basis versus the studying aspect of things. I think one thing in particular that always kind of comes up whenever we meet someone new or even just meeting with clients that we've worked with for a little while is a lot of times there is a bit of disconnect as far as going through daily activities and headlines that people are reading, whether it be on the news or different, articles that people are going through, that I think a lot of times there's a lot of noise to try to get through, and having people understand, the amount of information that's out there. There's plenty of it. So if you want to read and you want to learn, you certainly can do that. But trying to sift through that and really understand what of that information applies to their own situation, I think sometimes is a little bit hard to get through. I know a lot of times there's, we call it noise in the media and, things that are important and that we should be paying attention to. But there's also some things that may not apply to one person or another for whatever reason in their specific situation. And so I think that's something that, a lot of people struggle with, is just understanding what information is really pertinent to their own situation and what maybe can be left to the side.
Yeah, I that's a really interesting point. I never thought of it that way. When you're learning about financial planning, it kind of makes the assumption that you know what you should be doing, and then it helps you figure out how to make that happen. And you're not really getting bombarded with these offsetting or counter opinions. You're kind of following through what you're supposed to do. You get this information, you gather goal, you find out what their goals are, you run some analysis. But meanwhile, there's all these, directions of information that are coming at people, and they're kind of trying to get you off target. And that makes a lot of sense. And I think, that's something that we encounter on a regular basis is, people will call into the office or something like that. They need a little extra money, or somebody, has something that's generally unplanned or not part of the plan. And I think that's really where flexibility is such a critical element. And I don't really know that that's something in the financial planning academics, but to me, that I think that's really a critical piece, is you need to be flexible in your financial plans, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And that is definitely a big disconnect that I've seen from myself too. And it's not necessarily a negative thing. It's just something that you kind of learn over time. I think a lot of times financial planners and financial planning educational resources expect you to be able to come out of having met with new clients and basically write up a long document as to recommendations that they should implement. Sometimes it has to do with different insurance coverages. Maybe it's reallocating investments to better align with someone's goals or risk tolerance. But that always changes. And so flexibility is a huge part in that. I mean, recently we had a storm that came through, and, people have costs that come associated with that, relative to the house, that maybe that's not something you necessarily was going to think would take place. Or, maybe you have another kid that comes along that you weren't really planning for, but, that happens too. And so understanding how that changes the needs of people over time is huge. Sometimes people think that they're in a house that they're going to live in forever, and they decide that that's not the case. And so are you going to be looking for something bigger? Are we moving to a new state? That can mean that you're dealing with different tax laws, or it could mean that, you're just looking to upsize or downsize, and what does all of that entail? And so there's always things that are changing. Timelines change for when funds are needed. Different things pop up, along the way. And so flexibility is a huge aspect of what we're doing. And I think that's also why it's important to have a long-term relationship with your planner. Is they're going to understand you and your needs. And so when something like that does pop up, it may throw a wrench in what you thought you had going on before that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the long-term plan has changed, but something in the short or the midterm may need to adjust. And so that's a huge aspect of planning, is the ongoing aspect of it.
Yeah, that's that last thing you said in particular. That's a really good point. I think the value of having, an advocate, a planner, a sounding board, is when a person and they come in with a change, a lot of times they're afraid. They're thinking, I need to do this, or I want to do this, but how much is this going to throw off things? And we work with people, and we know how people have patterns. I always say that, right? People have patterns, and if you live a certain way, you tend to continue to live that certain way. So when that thing pops up, like you said, well, that's not your pattern. You're not one who just overspends and comes up with this sort of, one-off thing on a regular basis. So you can give them some comfort that it's okay. One, because you have done the calculations and verified it. But two, how they're going to behave going forward, or at least can, reaffirm that. I think that's an interesting point. That's, that is a big piece of it. And also, I think we tend not to do questionnaires. And I think I've shared this with you. I don't like to do questionnaires because it asks a person for their opinion about how they feel right now at the time that we ask the questionnaire. And so when something goes awry in the investment markets, for example, they might have said, "Oh, I'm perfectly fine with that." And then when it really happens, they're like, they kind of answer you differently. And what made me think of it, you were saying about having, a child or something like that. People say, "Oh, this is what I'm going to do if I have," they think they're really spot on planning, and this is what I'm going to do. And we think we're going to have a certain size family. Sometimes you get twins. That's unexpected. And sometimes, that family starts to grow, and you think, well, I'm not going to work as much. And so the plan has to constantly change. And likewise, you get to retirement, right? People get to that point and they're going, they think that they're going to, change their house. We talk about downsizing, and I always say downsizing isn't necessarily down spending. So, it doesn't always go according to plan. So you really have to be flexible and understand yourself, some self-awareness, but maybe that's a good part of what we do. And again, I don't think that's something the textbooks talk about, is self-awareness, and you as the planner kind of pulling out self-awareness from the people that you work with. So you and I were talking, Brian. I was going to sort of share my thoughts on our philosophy. And so, believe it or not, I discovered that there is a little bit of a professional internet debate on what goals-based planning and cash flow planning. And so before I open that Pandora's box, though, just give us a quick rundown of some of the key elements, no matter what kind of a financial plan it is, that are important as a foundation. And then I'd like to share a little bit about our philosophy and how that ties into textbook and real life. Yes.
Yeah, there's definitely textbook information that they say you need to gather that is very relative. I think one thing that we come back to a lot of the times is what we consider lifestyle, and we might dive into this a little bit more later in the podcast. But really what we're trying to get at is, what does it cost for you to live the life that you want to live? So some people, live off of one salary, and that's what gets them able to buy the groceries and pay for all the other costs that we have on a daily basis. And that could be a range of values for different people and different families. But even outside of just understanding what is your life cost, we talk to people that are at different stages of life, and depending on that stage could also change the information that we need to gather. Some of that could be, what does life insurance coverage that do you have right now? And that may change as far as your needs throughout your life goes. If people are, further along and closer to retirement, maybe they don't necessarily have the same needs as someone that's just starting off a new family. Outside of that could be, how much do you have saved up to this point? Again, depending on where you are in your life, you have more or less time if what we're planning for is retirement, or maybe we're planning for a vacation house or something along those lines. But understanding those goals, or what is it that we're trying to achieve, and then what the inputs into that are. And that's, how much are you saving at this point? What does cash flow look like just in general? Are there any gaps in, insurance coverages and things like that? So it's really just understanding the full picture of where are people at this point in their life, where are we trying to get to over the next couple of years, and then longer term from that point, and understanding the information that's necessary to know for those specific people and the stage of life that they're in.
Okay. Yeah. And I think it's really getting, like you just said, it's really getting to know and understand a person's situation. And there's some things that we have to know. We have to know income. We have to know savings and all of those things. But you really want to, pull all of that together. And you mentioned the key word, which I think is our philosophy here. So I mentioned goals-based and cash flow planning. And I said that there was a bit of a debate on the internet of which one is better. And what I find interesting is that it almost implies, something's better than the other, and people are putting things into a computer, and that's financial planning. And what you're sharing is, we're getting information to really get to know and understand a person and what matters most to them, and what they need to be able to accomplish what they're doing, rather than leading them down, this is what everyone should be doing, which is more, I'll say, an analytical or mathematical thing. People are going to behave the way they behave, and we need to manage that and help them get where they're going. Maybe sometimes put guardrails in for them, or help them just realize that there's some opportunities. And so those two schools of thought, I think, kind of overlap and really don't define the key and the primary way to execute good, what I would call good financial planning. And I think our philosophy is really what I call lifestyle-based planning. You mentioned the word lifestyle. And to me, that's the most critical piece of all. And don't you think when we meet with people, sometimes they have a hard time saying, exactly what it is that they're spending or what their lifestyle is. But that's really, I think we've got to tap into that, because that defines everything else. And so you mentioned whether it's life insurance at a middle stage of life, you're replacing income. So if you don't know what that lifestyle costs, that's really a critical piece. And I think if you're making more than enough money, you're probably spending it. And so cash flow planning tends to assume that if you have extra money, that's just going to go into the plan and get saved. And I think that's something that you've really uncovered over time together, is if people are making more than enough money, it doesn't mean that it's building up in a savings account necessarily, right?
Yeah, no, that's a great thing to bring up. And from a textbook perspective, a lot of times what they're talking about is, what is the percentage of your pre-retirement income that needs to be replaced to sustain someone throughout the latter half of life. And so that might be 60% or 70% of your, pre-retirement income is what they say you need to replace. But that number is really an arbitrary number, quite honestly. I think what's more important to understand is, what do you actually have coming in, and how much of that is going to bills that just have to be paid, and then how much of that is left over and actually being saved, if it is, And if not, what is that going to? Some people, when they go from, their working years to post-working years, say, oh, well, I'm not going to do X activity anymore. And if you don't have a conversation about that, then you don't understand that that's their intentions, that, maybe right now they are driving race cars on the weekend and they don't plan to do that when they're in retirement. Well, if you don't know that and there's a cost associated to it, then yeah, that's something that's going to change, and it's something that needs to be talked about and understood. And so, like you said, it really comes down to lifestyle. What is it that you want to be doing on a daily basis if you don't have a paycheck coming in anymore? And honestly, that question might be harder to answer than even what will it cost, because I think a lot of times people, spend so much time on their jobs or working or, commuting or getting ready for work and doing all those activities. If you're a business owner, then you're completely consumed by it, whether you want to admit it or not. I think most people, that we talk to that have a business, it really is on the mind 24/7. And so if that's not the case anymore, just understanding what your day-to-day looks like, maybe even harder than knowing what it costs. But that's really what it comes down to, is understanding what is the life that you're trying to live, and how best to plan for that.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. Although I don't know, if you were driving race cars on the weekend, why would you stop doing that?
I know I wouldn't be able to if it were me. But...
What are you talking about? But that's a good point. You're living your lifestyle, and I really feel very strongly about this. It's not our role to get you to change. It's our role to help you manage to doing what it is you're doing. If you are driving race cars on the weekend, that's what you do. You're not all of a sudden going to flip a switch and stop doing that. And so if you drive, a Chevy, you're probably going to keep driving a Chevy. And if you drive a Mercedes, you're probably going to keep driving a Mercedes. So that's your lifestyle. And so, unless there's some real red flags, it isn't our role to say, you could have more money left over if you did this, that, or the other thing. And so that's why I think lifestyle is so key. And some of these arguments on the internet that I'm talking about are, this is sort of a number that we've come up with, and this is what you have to do. And that's not really what I think financial planning is. And that's really, I think, goes back to the original comment about life getting in the way of plans, is that you start out and you think you're going to do things a certain way, and you get to a certain point in life and it's not quite there, and you've got to constantly adjust and pivot and continue to monitor and measure that you're still getting to where you thought you were going. And to your point, where you're going might even change along the way. And that's what financial planning is. And so that's where John Lennon comes in to a good financial plan, is, there's a lot more of that in what we do, than just crunching the hard numbers. That's just the verification. That's the part. I think it's the conversation that we have around the math, around the calculations, or whether it's goal place or cash flow based, or however you're, coming at it from a financial planning. It's the conversations that you have with the people that we're working with. And I think that's really the thing that comes out in real life planning, is the conversation, not so much the hard math. But, I'd like to go a little deeper on this, Brian. We have a financial bridge, and I talk about getting things organized. So let's do this. Let's come back another time, and let's start to go through some of these things together that we're seeing on a regular basis, and where we can, identify what people should be looking at, and apply that as we go through the financial bridge, and kind of looking at guiding through the plan. So let's stop here. I hope that you'll come back, hear what Brian has to say, and we'll share with you our philosophy here at Good Financial Services. And if you're at that point where you're thinking about what's life going to be like after the paycheck, if you're thinking about, where am I at this stage of my financial plan, because things are different, like that, maybe you wouldn't think we'd get to this point, then that's really where you want to listen in for. So you can get our book, Tell Your Boss I Quit, at tellyourbossiquitbook.com. You can find out more about Good Financial Services at goodfinancial.com. And you can set up for an appointment there, or have a conversation with us, and we'll help you get started on your financial plan. And we'll try not to let life get too much in the way.
Thank you for listening to Tell Your Boss I Quit. Click the follow button below to be notified when new episodes become available. To learn more about defining your financial purpose and how you can thrive and not sacrifice your spending in retirement, download Tell Your Boss I Quit by Pete Goodekinst. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the host and or guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Raymond James. This content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional financial advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service providers with any questions you may have regarding your individual situation. Securities are offered through Raymond James Financial Services, Inc., member FINRA, and SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Raymond James Financial Services Advisors, Inc. Goot Financial Services is not a broker-dealer and is independent of Raymond James Financial Services.